Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second livecast of the international project, Climate Citizens Assemblies, learning with, from, and for Europe. My name is Charlie, and I'm one of the program makers here at Pakhuis de Zwijger, but I'm also one of the initiators of this project, together with my partner in crime, Eva Rovers, here in the studio with me. So what is this project all about? We are actually in the midst of a 4-month exploration and a collective learning process. So we are going to explore how this model of a citizen assembly, and which is a form of deliberative democracy, how we can use that to, on one hand, come to more effective, more sustainable, and more just climate policies throughout Europe. And on the other hand, we're going to see how we can actually use this model to strengthen and to equip our democracies in Europe to deal with the challenges of the 21st century. We do so in different ways. So we are building up an online knowledge platform on our website. It's called Dossier, around this issue of climate citizen assemblies, which we're gonna feed with articles, interviews, books to read, podcasts to listen. We're gonna build it up throughout this process. And we're bringing people, key players in this field of climate citizen assemblies, together in livecasts such as this. So our aim is to bring together movements, to bring together experience, knowledge, insights, and to learn from each other, basically, to prevent that everyone in Europe is failing and learning and succeeding on its own. And we're trying to connect the forces and connect the powers and the experiences of everyone. So hopefully we can then in the end come to the best guidelines, the best insights and lessons for how we can use this model of a citizen assembly for the climate in the best way. So we're going to do this with speakers, but our audience is also always very wise and very insightful. So if you are, or if you have experience with climate citizen assemblies in Europe, and you want to share that experience, or you want to share a book that you read that you really think is relevant, or if you have no idea and you have a question, let us know. Join the conversation. You can do that tonight by tuning in through Zoom on our program page, and then you can ask a question or you can make a remark, and this will be sent to me, and I will try to include it into the conversation. But also on a later moment, you can send me an email. My email address will appear, and if you somehow want to connect to us and to the project, please do. We're looking forward to it. Okay, so tonight we are going to zoom in on a specific issue. We're going to look at representation, inclusion, legitimacy. So we're really going to dive into sometimes a little bit more technical issues when it comes to the citizen assemblies, and we're going to see what the importance is of those type of questions and those type of concepts when working towards this best implementation of a citizen assembly. Okay, so this is the plan. But first things first, what do we actually mean when we talk about this type of topics? And luckily, I don't have to explain that to you, but I do have two speakers here that are going to enlighten us a bit and introduce us to these concepts. That is mentioned before. My partner in crime here in the studio, Eva Rovers, cultural historian and co-founder of Bureau Burgerbraad here in the Netherlands. Welcome, Eva. Good to see you again. And through Zoom, we will be joined by Yves de Jagere, the executive director of the Federation for Innovation in Democracy Europe. Hi, Yves. Nice that you're here. Like I said, we're gonna lay down the fundaments for the rest of this conversation. Eva, I'm going to start with you. So you are part of this project. We're running this together. What is, in your perspective, the importance of issues as inclusion and representation when it comes to this European exploration of a citizen assembly? Why is it relevant that we talk about these topics?
Yeah, well, you called it a technical issue, but I think it's a very powerful and perhaps even an emotional aspect of citizens' assemblies, because I think one of the most important aspects of a citizens' assembly is that it is trusted by citizens. And that everybody who is not in the citizens' assembly still feels that he or she is connected to the assembly, that he or she can trust the assembly, that someone in the assembly is a little bit like them and will make the sort of decisions that he or she will make. And to get to that point, that perhaps it's good to understand that the citizens' assembly is usually made up of about 150 people. And sometimes people ask me, can I give myself up for a citizens' assembly? Because it sounds very interesting and I want to join.
Can I apply somewhere?
Yeah, but no, unfortunately, you cannot sign up for a citizens' assembly because the participants are selected by lot. So there is a random selection of the participants. And that is, we use that technique of random selection to make sure that there is a cross-section of society in the Citizens' Assembly, so that those 100 or 150 people are a cross-section of society, and not just people interested in the subject or people interested in politics, but really a very broad range of perspectives. And this makes sure that the Citizens' Assembly is a better representation of society, not in the way politicians are representatives, but really a representation of society.
Yeah, because the politicians often are the people who are already eager, already involved, already educated to be a part of
in most governments, the people in the government are not a cross-section of society. Usually, for instance, in the Netherlands, over 60% is male. You have a lot of people who have a university degree, a lot of people who are trained to be lawyers. So there are very interesting people, very willing people, but they are not a cross-section of society. And this causes a lot of people to get estranged from politics, a lot of people who don't feel represented or not heard by politics. So that's a difference. A citizens' assembly is really a cross-section of society, so that more people can recognize themselves in that selection of people, but also very important that through this process of random selection, you get a very broad perspective. You get a lot of different perspectives in the mix, and this is very good for complex problem solving. So, for instance, when we deal with climate change, which is very complex, you need as much perspectives as you can get. So not just perspectives from politicians or from civil servants or from people who went to university, but from all, you need perspectives from all walks of life to deal with this very complex.
I see. So it's both important within the group and to tackle the challenge that's at hand. If you have different perspectives, you're able to see it more clearly from different views, and hence you can act upon it in a better way. But it's also important in order to have the rest of society who is not participating in the assembly to recognize themselves, whether it be in how they look or how they think, to recognize themselves in...
It's very important, I think, that if you have 150 people in that assembly, that the other millions of people in society still can think, well, there's at least one or two people like me. So there is someone who I can trust to make some sort of decision that I would make as well. And that's, well, that I think that is very important for a citizens' assembly to be credible to the rest of society.
Okay, well, but this sounds very positive and very hopeful, but we're going to use the rest of this hour to really discuss these issues. So why is that necessary? What do we still need to discover or learn?
I think it's very difficult to get that cross-section. And it's also very difficult, that's one of the things I'm very curious about this evening, to understand how you can get to this inclusive, representative combination of people, but also how you make sure that the rest of society really trusts the recommendations that are made by the Citizens Assembly. Because if the rest of the society doesn't trust the Citizens Assembly, then it becomes very difficult for it to be a credible partner in developing new policy with regard to climate change, for instance, or other kinds of policies. So how do you make sure that society is actually trusting that Citizens Assembly?
Yeah, what are constructs or ways? What are instruments to make sure that this, at least that we get a step further in achieving that goal? Yves de Jager, you are the executive director of Fide. Just very briefly, just to get a bit of a sense of what is Fide?
Fide is an NGO based in Brussels. We've just started since the beginning of February.
Brand new.
It is brand new, but it represents a group of people who've been working on this for over the last 2 decades.
Yeah.
And so
Less new.
The idea is that this is really a pivotal moment when we talk about topics just as legitimacy, representation. I think the idea of now bringing citizens in with Citizens Assembly is a very crucial moment. I think for everybody interested in politics, in the sense that we're, for the first time since a very long time, putting something in our political system where we agree that it should have some level of influence that could stand next to a parliament, even though the parliament still has the last word. And I think this is very good tonight. I'm the only male in the group. So I'll bring in a soccer metaphor.
Oh no, that's such a stereotype now. Okay, bring it.
I would say that the citizen participation until now, citizens have been asked to participate, but in most cases, they are the ball boys of the soccer game. When the ball goes out, they throw it back in, and then the politicians play the game. And they stand on the side of the pitch, right? And so what is very interesting now, and this is where Fide is also an NGO wanting to catch that moment and help that moment is done in the right way, is that for the first time we're reevaluating some of the legitimacy of the whole system, actually, by bringing in something new. And you can see this at all levels. Actually, the European Union is also struggling with this at the moment, is suddenly there is this thing, let's put citizens in for real, not for play anymore. And what you can see is that kind of in an odd puzzle, the citizen is very hard to fit in what we have. And so when you do that, you have to make sure for every citizen, I will probably very often, like Eva said, you cannot, be yourself saying like, I'll be in the Citizen Assembly. Especially, you should avoid white middle-aged males such as me who love to hear themselves speak. But if somebody else takes a decision for me, I want that decision to be taken in a good way. Yeah. So I don't want a badly run Citizen Assembly either.
Okay, so let's get back to, because tonight we're specifically looking at this issue of inclusion, representation. Eva just mentioned the importance of that for both the trust in a citizen assembly by the rest of society, but also the importance of including all those different perspectives inside such an assembly to come to better solutions. You just mentioned the word legitimacy. How do these issues relate to each other? How does that make a citizen assembly less or more legitimate?
Well, very briefly, the system we have until now is process legitimacy. You do elections, and even if 90% male come out of that in a parliament, the process makes them legitimate. The legitimacy of a citizen assembly is in the word citizen. It is some form or some technique to have a representation of your citizens. So the legitimacy is also in the process, in the sense it needs to be run well, etc. But a good part of this is in what Eva already said, is that people look at this group and say, somebody like me has been part in a decision that had to be taken. And very often citizens have some opinions about topics, very salient topics, they will have an idea, but many citizens don't have all the information needed to take decisions, very complex, you will have some knee-jerk ideas maybe from some people, but in general, there is also a legitimacy in giving this group time, which means if you want to take in a group of citizens that is not used to be part of the public sphere,
yes,
you also need to give them time. How will they process this information? And I think Priscilla and Doreen can talk much more about this later on. So you have to rethink all these things. And for me, and then, I know we're in a short time frame, but why I say that is we're reevaluating some of the legitimacy of the whole system is we don't ask these questions to politicians, right? We have 150 people in parliament. Nobody interviewing them ever goes like, did you read all the information, all 150 of you? Have you read everything on climate change? Because they have process legitimacy, right? But our citizen assembly, the legitimacy comes on the composition of the group, the way the information was presented. Was it balanced? We're actually asking a lot more tough questions sometimes to the citizens in the citizen assembly than we demand of politicians, because they have, the vote, right? And then there's this magic happens and what they do is right. And so for people outside, it is very important that this is done in a way that they feel, yes, this is fair. And otherwise it would have no sense whatsoever to put something new next to a parliament.
Because then it's doomed to fail.
Well, if citizens have the feeling this is biased, or people like me are not in there, or this is done in a way that, climate, they had to decide on climate in a day with a handful of information. They only heard this or this topic. People should look at this and have the impression, this is fair enough. And I will trust what these people come up with after having deliberated over this information.
Thank you, Yves. Thank you. So luckily, we have two people with us through Zoom who some way or another have been a part of a citizen assembly, be it in very different ways. So we have two speakers. One speaker is from Scotland, the other is coming from France. Two citizen assemblies that actually were initiated in a very different way. In France, it was really a bottom-up grassroots movement that led the way towards a climate citizen assembly, while in Scotland, it was through the government that they started to experiment with citizen assemblies, specifically also around climate. We have already, laid down some of the difficulties and the challenges in coming towards an inclusive, a representative, and a legitimate citizen assembly. And we have invited these two speakers to introduce us to their case studies, to their experiences, looking through this lens. What have they learned? What have they seen? So we're going to start. I'm going to introduce them one by one. I'm going to just start first with Priscilia. Priscilla Ludovsky is one of the founders of the Yellow Vests movement in France. She started an online petition in 2018 about the need for lower fuel taxes. And this petition attracted so much attention and so much support. 1.19 million people, a lot of national attention, and then in 2019, in the midst of the protests, a proposal came to create a climate citizen assembly, and the President Emmanuel Macron, got on board. And I think it's still going on there in the final phase. France is an interesting example when it comes to climate citizen assemblies. Also because there's a lot that went well, but also a lot that needs improvement. So Priscilia, thank you for joining us. We're very, very happy to welcome you here. Can I please ask you to do that, right? So to look at the process that you went through in France, through this perspective of inclusion, of representation, this cross-section, the trust that needs to be created, and give us an example of something that went really well and something that really needs to be better next time.
Hello, thank you.
Hi.
Hi, you hear me well?
Yes, we can, yeah. Maybe we can see you bigger as well. We want to see you full screen, yes.
I don't know if you don't see me well.
Yes, there you are.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you. Yes, the process is still going on.
Yeah.
We hope it will end with the referendum we're waiting for. I don't think it will be possible, but let's see.
Yeah.
Actually, if I look in an inclusive way, with a look, first I would say there is maybe two levels: the inclusion of the public, the people out of the process, and the inclusion of in the way you select people who are out of the process. And in France, what is interesting in France is that at the beginning actually of the year of 2019, you have different profile, different activists who join to ask for this measure to create these citizen assemblies. And together, we try to demand 5 what we called red lines to say, okay, we ask you in the open letter to the president that we wanted the creation of this citizen assembly, but we ask you to respect, at least to try to guarantee a kind of successful process, that you respect 5 things, 5 red lines.
Yeah.
Yes, and that was the first one was that we needed a commitment of the president prior to the launch of the Citizen Assembly to follow the decision of the Citizen Assembly. The second one was to have a selection of at least 150 citizens among the French population, and this is really important, this one, because this is the inclusion subject we are talking about, how they will be selected. And what we asked was we wanted that an independent institute take care of this selection first, and then we wanted that they respect the different profile we have in the French population. The criteria was the gender, the proportion had to be respected. We have in France 52% of women and 48% of men, and we wanted to find this proportion in the Citizen Assembly. The criteria of age, 6, you had 6 scale, 6 level of age. I don't know how we call it.
Age groups, maybe.
Yeah, thank you. From 16 years old. Knowing that in France you cannot vote before 18.
Yes.
So the fact that we have to include young people is very important in France because, and maybe out also, but I'm saying in France because when we asked to the creation of the Citizen Assembly, this was a success for us that the president accepted because of the deep mobilization of Yellow Vest and climate movement.
Yes.
And in the climate movement, you have a lot of young people.
Yeah.
So they have a voice, they have something to express. So it was very important for them to express also in this kind of process. The third criteria was the level of education. People with high diploma, people with no diploma, for example, and all people between. The other one was the socio-professional categories, which has to be to reflect the diversity of the socio-professional categories of workers, employees, executive, and people which are in extreme poverty. And for this, we asked to the institute to link with organizations which are in connection with people in this kind of situation. And also people who don't have any phone. Yeah. Because the institute called 85% of people who had a phone at home, and 15% of people who had mobile. But to include people who don't have phone, the institute had to get linked with NGOs that themselves linked to people which are in extreme poverty without any phone, to try to include them. The other criteria was the criteria of territory. Whether you live in the big cities, whether you live in rural places, and in France you have also French overseas department, islands, Caribbean islands. So we made people from there come also for this citizen assembly. And the last one was the no, actually you have the territory, and then in France, so cities, rural, and so on, and then geographical with the French citizens islands. So this is a way to be the more inclusive possible. I think that maybe it can be improved, but this was a big topic for us in the red lines.
And one of the things that we mentioned before is also the difficulty of including people who are maybe not included before. How do you also make it possible for people to participate in a citizen assembly when they have never been in touch with the topic or the way of deliberation, or everything that's part of the process? Were there specific was there like a specific thing that worked really well or absolutely didn't work when it comes to that issue?
Yes, this is a question in the mid.
A little bit of both?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. What went sort of middle way,
Yes, legitimacy and inclusive topic. And actually it's a good question, because when people had been called first by this institute, some of them said, okay, I need to reflect, I need to think about it. Am I the good person to do this? I mean, we have 577 deputies in the parliament. We have the Senate. We have a lot of people working on that topic. And why should I go? To do what? And I'm not an expert. So I don't feel qualified. And some of the members expressed that. Some of them think that it was a good idea to participate, because maybe you know, but one of the big family of demands in the Yellow Vest movement was a deep transformation of the political system. So include the population in the build of measures is a way to transform things inside. So, and to give your advice to the government. So
exactly like Eve also stated, it's a bigger critique, it's a bigger transition of the system by including and putting the citizen on a central spot.
Yes, and to help to make people to give to make them feel how I can say that. To help them to take the decision to come.
Responsible. To convince them or to assure them that they can and that they are able to be a part of it.
It was actually to say that, and this is one of our red lines also, was to say that you will not be alone. You will have people coming to explain you the situation, and you will have the right to claim, to talk to people, to talk to associations, to talk to collectives, or anyway. And but we had to be sure that not the institute, but the organization that organize the citizen assembly, that if you ask for an expert on climate who defend the fact that we have to reduce our emission gas, you will have to bring an expert who are against this also.
You have to keep the balance. So again, including the different perspectives around the issue, also in how you bring the information on the table.
Yes, but what I can say just quickly is that I think that it will be more easier to convince people if you had first, in a long time before, to educate people over the necessity, if we think this is necessary, of what a selection by lot can bring to democracy. Because when you receive a call at home saying, okay, you can come to work over climate, I mean, if you don't know what is a process of citizen assembly, if you don't know why they call you for, if you don't know...
so even the invitation itself already requires attention. Yeah.
Yes.
Priscilla, I'm going to come back to you a little bit later, but I want to include Doreen into this conversation. Doreen Grove is the head of open government at the Scottish Government. Hi, Doreen. Very lovely that you're here. Like I said, Scotland has also started to work with citizen assemblies. And if I understood correctly, the second citizen assembly that was organized really focused on climate. Doreen, I have the same question for you. So again, put on the glasses of inclusion, representation, and look at the process that was laid out in Scotland. And please tell us what was your biggest do and your biggest don't when it comes to these type of issues?
It's a really interesting question, and thank you for the invitation. I'm going to start by challenging something Eve said. The word citizen is a really interesting one. It implies an awful lot of things. We do use it in Scotland because that is the word we use, but many of our most vulnerable people are not citizens. And in Scotland, they are allowed to vote. And we're, of course, part of our selection here. Sorry, that was just it's something that always makes me slightly uncomfortable. It is just concentrating on citizens. Fairness and equality were absolutely at the heart of our citizen assembly. And you're right, it is our second. We have run two now. The first one was on the future of Scotland, had a really big rambling question and came up with some absolutely fantastic answers around democracy and fairness and inclusion itself. But one of the other really important things about that was we were able to learn a little bit about what we'd done in the first one, to take what was good into the second and leave what wasn't. So the first thing I would say is the question that went to this assembly was all about inclusion. So the question was, how should Scotland change to tackle the climate emergency in an effective and fair way?
Yep.
That was absolutely at the heart of it. I absolutely recognise Priscilla's desire to have this as something that can help make decisions. Our assembly was established by Parliament, and Parliament will make the final decisions. But what we did manage to achieve was requiring that the report that comes from the assembly goes to Parliament and is properly debated, and government will give an answer to all the commitments. It won't commit now to doing all of them all of the time, but it has very clearly said that it's respecting the process. Our process was not unlike the French process in selection. So we did a lottery or a sortation. We had 100 citizens and our weightings were not so different. We had geography. We have very rural areas in Scotland and also islands. And we have strong urban centres. Some, of course, which are Scotland's an oil-rich country, so there are big areas where that tension between the aspects of climate change, and not only do we have the sort of northeast oil and gas industries, but we're also one of the biggest producers of natural energy anywhere on the planet. We have renewable energy into our mix. But we were trying to look at age, gender, protected characteristics, so disabilities of a wide range, race, views on climate change. We wanted a balance of views on climate change. We wanted to look at income and deprivation. So the weighting for our selection was agreed in advance we had a secretariat who were moved out of government, and that independence of the secretariat, so it wasn't being run directly by government. That secretariat were appointed a stewarding group, which was a group of experts, both participation experts, but also climate experts, to oversee the development of the Citizen Assembly, to agree the kind of evidence that went before it, and to really hold to account the design and the deliberation. It was that stewarding group with the Secretariat that worked out the question, because Parliament didn't set it. We had activists on that group, we had farmers, we had people from all sorts of industries. So it was a really very active group. That group also had a long debate about how we recognize the value of people's time, because we should represent and pay people for their time. They are giving up a significant amount of time. And for some people, that might be the difference between being able to be part of it and not being part of it.
How significant was the time investment of people? How often did people come together?
There were 7 weekends. It was all online because it happened during COVID. Our first one was half online and half face to face.
So it was a digital session. Yeah.
It was entirely, and we were incredibly careful, as Priscilla said, about digital inclusion. So not only did we provide digital tools for people, we also paid for their data. And thought about how they get that. We had one 80-year-old who'd never been on the internet, and we had to hold his hand all the way through. And someone actually read, because he wasn't very good, when all of the voting was happening for the recommendations at the end, one of the team of our design and facilitation team sat and read him all of the recommendations and got his vote from everyone just on the phone. So you have to be really thoughtful about what you put in place in order to support people. That really matters. In UK, we aren't able to pay people as we would necessarily like because of some of the strict regulation around it affecting their benefits and social security. So we pay an honorarium. But what we are trying to do is recognize that Citizen Assembly is an absolutely valid form of evidence gathering. And as long as it has a learning phase, where people are presented with honest and balanced evidence. And I slightly balked at if somebody says that, we have to do that. One of the things that we were incredibly careful about was to not suggest that climate change didn't exist. That has been accepted into law in Scotland, and we didn't want to challenge that. We obviously people could if they wished on the tables, but we wanted to be really clear that where the science is. We had a fantastic evidence team, and one of the benefits of being online is that the evidence is all there for people to use. So the resource is absolutely fantastic. The one final or two final bits on inclusion that we really particularly did with this assembly. We did an online ideation in advance of the assembly to get just the general views of the population. And we had about 2,000 ideas from that. But much more importantly, we ran a parallel process with our children's parliament. So we had 100 children from absolutely across Scotland and 10 children who were appointed as children's researchers. So they answered the same questions, not in quite the same way.
Luckily, maybe. Yeah.
But their report will be put before Parliament in exactly the same way as the full Citizen Assembly. So we were really thoughtful about trying to make sure that, and yes, similarly, actually 16-year-olds can vote in Scotland anyway. They can't in the rest of the UK. But we wanted, because this is something that absolutely is a future generation's issue. And of course, it's ours as well. And as you can tell, I'm immensely old. So, so it'll affect me less than most of you. But actually, that future generations element felt really important to us. And I have to say, it was incredibly successful. They really put their hearts and souls into it. And came up with really powerful suggestions.
Doreen, thank you so much. I'm going to ask to already include the other speakers visually back with us in the studio. Eva, I see you have a question.
Yeah, please. I have a question, perhaps for all of you, but Doreen was the one who touched upon the subject. When you think about the characteristics you use to have this inclusive selection of people, age, gender, but you also mentioned the views on climate change. How do you put that into the mix? How do you ask people about that? How do you make sure that that doesn't get politicized? Because I think that's a very difficult subject.
And Doreen, just before you start, because this directly connects to a question that also came from the audience, so I'm going to throw that in as well. A question from Kathy Kahn. Do you think that attitude towards climate should be part of the selection procedure in order to have representation of attitude? So it's both, should it be, and then how do you ask about it? Doreen.
Well, I'm certainly, we debated it long and hard in the student group. And as I said, we had climate activists on the group. And they were really clear that they thought it should be almost entirely made up of climate activists. We did not think that was reasonable. And one of the things we're really keen to do is make sure that the press have an opportunity to understand, so you can get the communication about what's happening in the room out. And you know, come hell or high water, the first question they're going to ask is, oh, you just selected everybody who doesn't like climate change or who does like climate change. So we needed to have an answer for that. And I think it's entirely legitimate. We just gave people a sliding scale. Where are you on it?
Just a quick check. Priscilia, Yves, do you agree? Do you think it's important to also include the attitude towards climate change within the selection procedure? You can also nod. Oh, Priscilia, we can't hear you.
Sorry, the question is, I think it's necessary to not impose, but almost to people that they have to talk about this subject. Is that the question, or?
The question is, within the selection of the people to be part of the Citizen Assembly, do you have to include this factor of their attitude towards climate change? So do they believe in it? Do they not believe in it? Are they what is their attitude towards it?
I think it's better to have people who trust and not trust, because what we saw in the Citizen Assembly in France is that you had people who didn't, who was not concerned about that, and who finally became. So it's important that you have, if you have only persons in the assembly that trust it, you will not, for me, will not be successful in trying to convince the population, because that is important in what the members said after. They said that during the process and after that, I talked to my family, friends, colleagues about what happened. And I told them that the crisis is important and really we have to take care about it.
Yeah.
Whereas when they came in the process, maybe they wasn't aware of that. So it's important to have both, I think, and not to impose the subject.
Yves, do you agree?
I would in general not always advocate that you ask people opinions before they come in a climate assembly, because actually it's not about them you don't want to give them the feeling to represent something. But in some cases, and I think Doreen put it down very well, people outside of the assembly might question whether this is legitimate if people in the assembly might be biased, might be too much towards one view or another. Yeah. I think another beautiful example is Graham Smith did an academic exercise, but he did a citizen assembly on Brexit. Yeah. But not should we have Brexit or not, but what kind of Brexit should we have, right? Same thing as Doreen, Brexit is there, we're not going to re-debate, but he asked people what they voted in the referendum. And he took that as a sampling, part of the sampling. Why? If they came out with a very soft Brexit, any critical Daily Mail journalist would go like, but you selected only lefty Labour voters. So he was sure the first question would be, but did you have a majority of Brexit voters? Yeah. And so it is about the legitimacy. But in many cases, what you want is perspectives at the table, not attitudes. Because if you would do this all the time, and for me, this is important, you don't want to put people there. They are people chosen at random, and you use these criteria because you want women there. For example, you want people with a disability, not because there is a specific view of people with a disability on climate.
Yes.
You want inclusive where all kinds of perspectives are present, but not because they have a certain attitude. And if you would ask too much attitude questions all the time, you would make citizen assemblies also about, you are here because you defend the no position, right? Yeah. And I would want to avoid that. But in some cases, cases it's impossible because your assembly would not be seen as legitimate to begin with, journalists.
The other thing you asked about was, what are the strengths and weaknesses? And one of the really important strengths for both of our citizen assemblies has been the quality of the facilitation. Yeah. So the quality of the facilitation is hugely important. Yes. Eve's right. There is a risk that people see themselves as representing something, but how you design the process and how you include people and how you make sure that the tables are able to hear all the perspectives. And that's where the magic happens, when people have to hear somebody else's view and say, oh, right, well, I haven't really thought of it like that. And that is how we all shape the way we change our views. So I'm hugely of the view, you do need to be really thoughtful about the weighting criteria. But you need, as soon as people come into the assembly, to reassure them that they are there because they're them, not because they are a woman, they're white or black, they are disabled or have a particular view about climate change, but they are there because they are them.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. So this is also connecting to one of the questions from the audience. So it relates to this evidence gathering and the information that is being made available or that is being shared with the participants of Citizen Assembly. Connecting that directly to what you just said, Doreen, about the importance of the facilitation of the process and the organization of the process, of how people deal with this information, how they deal with each other, how they join conversation. In which way? What is the role of this facilitator or facilitators when it comes to these different issues? Also around the evidence, but could also be other elements of making the process inclusive.
The facilitators are there simply to help the people who are participating to be able to participate fully. So the design of the sessions is really very careful. And the evidence is developed in advance, thought about, balanced. You also want to be able to present evidence in different ways. Everybody learns slightly differently. So for some people, seeing a film will be a really good way. Other people prefer to read. So it is. It's important both that you have a balance, that people are able and have time to absorb that evidence, and as Priscilla said earlier, have the right to challenge it, have the right to ask questions of the people presenting the evidence, to say, well, actually, is that real? Or, tell me how you come to that.
Yeah, make sure that there's room for questions, for reflection, and and time as well. Yeah. Priscilla, I'm curious because I explained, of course, how you in France initiated the petition and are one of the spokespersons of the Yellow Vest movement. But your role in this entire story, you are not actually part of, for example, the organizers of the Citizen Assembly in France. What was your role, and in that way also the role of a grassroots movement within this process?
Actually, the first important date is the 10 days after the first demonstration in the Yellow Vest movement, 27th of November of 2018, when we met the Ministry of the Ecological Transition. One of the demands was to create the Citizen Assembly, to make people participate.
Yes.
And he didn't take that for serious. So we understood at this time that alone it couldn't be possible. So right after, in January of the year after, we joined with some association who defend the innovative democratic tools to be included and who fight to transform the politics structures.
So we're shaping a coalition. Yeah,
exactly. And we join with the climate activists. We join with researchers. We join with a lot of profiles who used to work over that topic at different level. And we decided to create a coalition named the Citizen Vest. Mm-hmm. And the first action we did is to write this letter to the president, saying that we wanted to create a citizen assembly for climate, for democracy, and for taxation. And what is important in what Doreen said is that the first inclusion signal was to include the social aspect. And this is the link with my petition, because my petition wasn't only on fuel taxation, but it was to denounce the fact that it wasn't fair for people who don't have the choice to take car that pay a lot for these fuel taxes. Yeah. And so the mandate of the Citizen Assembly was to make it possible to create measures to reduce the emission gas in a social aspect. Taking into consideration the social aspect. This is the first time that we see in a message of a big demands from activists, climate activist demands, the social aspect, officially in a mandate providing by the government, actually. Yeah.
And Priscilia, and then because I asked about specifically also your role in relation to the Citizen Assembly, also a little bit because of time. I love the story, but just to get to this this part.
Yes, sorry, it was important for me to explain from the beginning.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah.
And what I wanted to say is that my role was really delicate because I was in the Yellow Vest movement. Mm-hmm. And I was in discussion through the collective with the government, knowing that the Yellow Vest movement mistrusts the government, knowing that the third chamber who organized all the logistic of the Citizen Assembly is the third chamber of the government, which is the economical Environmental and Social Council of France. So I couldn't participate more due to my position. Because of this mistrust. You need to know that the rate of trust from the French population of an institution is only 11%.
Yeah. So low. Yeah.
It's really important for me to that people I was working with know that I'm not going institution because I don't trust the grassroots movement, but because we need to move on.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, but becoming a part of the institution or even appearing to become a part of it could actually be harmful to the entire grassroots movement that you were a part of.
Yes, and so to respond exactly to the question you asked me is some of us in the collective proposed to be part of the process. And I refused to be on that list to be proposed to the government.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want that the government use my name to say anything. So I said no. But some of people of the collective be part of the one of the person is Laurence Toubiana, who he is the architect of the climate agreement in France.
Yes.
Who was the co-president of the device. Then you have another person who is one of the three warrants of the device. You have another person of the coalition who is two person who would be part of the committee of
oversight committee.
The oversight committee.
The pilot committee. I don't know how you can call that.
Yeah. So some of them infiltrated the system a bit, but you stayed out of it specifically because of this issue of trust. And that I'm gonna return to you, Eva, because that was one of the things that you started with, this importance of trust and how the society. How can we make a citizen assembly as such that society can trust it, and in that way also that it is seen as legitimate. I'm just curious to hear, because our time is almost up already. But what stood out for you? What did you learn? What new insights did you collect in this exploration?
Yeah, well, a lot of things. Everything was very interesting and insightful. But I think in every process, every step of the process, there are things to be learned. For instance, what Priscilia said about when people are selected, when they get this invitation to take part in the Citizens Assembly, that you really need to take an extra effort to convince people that they don't need to be experts. They don't need to know much about the subject. They don't need to be politically active. So that that it's really important to convince people that it's about their personal experience, their perspective.
And that they will not be alone.
And that they will not be alone, no. And also that there's this a lot of, it's very important to educate people about Citizens Assembly so that they know what it is, that they feel more comfortable, that they know that as a everyday person, it's very valuable that they are in that Citizens Assembly. Also the part about the attitude towards climate change, I think that is very interesting. Also, what Yves also mentioned and Doreen, for the people outside, for people outside of the Citizens Assembly to really feel people in the assembly are not biased. This is really a trustworthy cross-selection of the society. So, just to name a few, but
all really works towards the legitimacy issue, of course, of the entire concept in that sense. Time is almost done. I'm just gonna ask all of you at home to please send me more questions or remarks. I loved it that you joined the conversation. I couldn't include everything, but I'm going to send your questions to the speakers, and I will find a way to somehow get it back to you. So keep an eye on the website of Pakhuis de Zwijger, and specifically this dossier, this online platform that we're working on, because we're going to take your input and we're going to get back to you. Dear speakers on Zoom, thank you so much. I wish we could talk for hours and hours more, but thank you so much for being here, for sharing your insights and your experiences. To you as well, if you have specific books, podcasts, case studies, if you want to share something, if you want to contribute to the platform, or if you have questions or you want to learn something about a specific topic when it comes to the Citizen Assembly, you feel like, oh, we need to create this European collective brain and we need to let it loose on this issue, please let us know. Let's try and make a momentum out of this and help everyone a step forward. Eva, of course, also thank you so much for being here again. Next week, we have our third event that is going to follow up specifically looking at this issue of mandate and the political follow-up of citizen assemblies. So that also relates to some of the questions that came in. What is actually happening when the recommendations are being made, and how is this process evolving? What is the role of citizens in that part of the conversation? So we're going to continue talking about that next week on Wednesday, the 26th, here through livecast at Pakhuis de Zwijger again. Please keep an eye on our agenda also for a lot of other events. And if you wish to make a donation for Pakhuis, that's also possible. In other words, check out the website. Thank you so much for watching and hope to see you next week.